A shameful deed. Manus slept alone. It was Christmas and he was lonely and frustrated. His girlfriend Jane sometimes came up to his caravan and screwed him, but then she would go back down to her house, to her kids and her husband, who was out of prison now after 4 years. 4 years during which Manus had looked after the kids, more or less, and Jane and Manus had had a fairly ludicrous relationship, consisting of heroin and no heroin, fucking and fighting. She wasn't screwing her husband, he was just up for Christmas and to see the kids. Manus didn't know whether to believe her or not, but either way he knew for a fact that he slept alone and he was lonely, and it was frustrating waiting for Jane, who sometimes came up and screwed him, but only when it was convenient for her. She was going to come up on Christmas Day, but the day passed and she didn't show. Nick Lord came up to the land and invited Manus for food and drink at his house, and Manus went. Nick said he'd been down at Jane's earlier in the day and had witnessed a cosy family scene. Nick was a bit of a wind-up merchant, and after some wine with him, Manus went out and bought a bottle of brandy and called for Mary. Mary was in a similar position to Manus in that her lover's ex was up for Christmas to see her kids, and Mary was left on her own. Mary and Manus drank the brandy. It wasn't so much that they fancied each other, it was just that they were sick of sleeping alone while their supposed partners saw their exes. Anyway, they were going to sleep with each other. Then, just as the final hour approached, in walked Mary's fella, and tail between his legs, Manus slunk off to his caravan on his own. He felt cheated, and a cheater. He didn't like the way he felt. He had to fight with himself to get the anger and frustration from eating his insides out. He shouted out songs and stamped his feet. Eventually he went to sleep. When he woke up, the caravan was filled with smoke. There was an orange glow somewhere above his head where a candle had fallen against the wall and smouldered. The heat was stifling. The drink he had consumed the night before and the thickness of the smoke that filled the caravan had him completely disorientated. He tried vainly to find the door. The heat and smoke got more intense. Manus thought how neat it would all be. One dead Manus, not even a trace left. How convenient. How final. Manus found a window, couldn't open it, dived through it. His arm ripped open on the glass, proper deep rip, flesh peeled back to reveal sinuous meat and veins. He tried to get back into the caravan through the door to retrieve a manuscript, but the air had rushed through the window and the caravan was a furnace, an instant box of flames. Burn on. So there he stood, barefoot in dirty underpants and vest with a ripped open arm. He could have turned to and received help from people on the land, but he decided to run off the land, down a dirt track, and onto the street that Jane lived on. Jane came to her window scowling, but on seeing the state he was in, she quickly opened the door, gave him a towel to wrap his arm in, somebody else's trousers, her coat, and got him a taxi to the hospital. Manus was lucky. Nothing permanent was wrong with him. Just 50 stitches. And a plaster Paris for a month. Jane came visiting for the few days he was in hospital. She brought him draw, Guinness and whiskey. She was loving and affectionate and repentant for not coming up to see him on Christmas Day. When he got out of hospital, he took another caravan and Jane would come up and see him, and things were pretty much back to normal. Manus slept alone. Jane was busy with her family. Everywhere he went, everybody seemed to be paired off and he was on his own. On a Friday night, he went home early, alone. His caravan was parked next to another, and he had to listen to two healthy bastards screwing each other all night long while he lay alone and couldn't avoid listening. The next morning, Manus had no newspapers. That was his sewerage system at the time. He used to shit on top of newspapers, wrap it up, and then burn it on the fire. So not having any newspapers was no fun. He trotted off to a bed and breakfast house where his friend Nick lived. Bed and breakfast houses were houses where the government paid to have unemployed people live. They were doss houses, where dossers or unemployed or people without money lived. The back door was locked, which was unusual for the house, and Manus had to climb, plaster of Paris arm and all, through the window. He had a shit in Armitage's shanks, washed his bum and tried to stick his piles back from whence they came. Washed his hands and went down to see how Nick was faring. Normally Nick was faring badly. He had kids with a brute of a woman who gave him dog's abuse, and Manus and Nick sometimes, if not consoled each other, then at least shared in each other's misery. This morning, however, Nick was doing just fine. Lying next to Nick was a pretty young nubile. With the sheet pulled up to her chin, she smiled shyly at Manus. Manus couldn't help sniffing as she seemed to be putting out her scent, but Nick was gloating over his prized trophy and not prepared to share. Manus cursed his luck and went back to his caravan for breakfast. After breakfast, he broke his rule of not calling at Jane's house while her husband was there. Jane stood with Manus in her kitchen, wearing her long dressing gown. He opened her dressing gown and pulled the warmth of her body against his, sucked on her nipples. His hard-on strained against his jeans. He pressed the bulge against her leg, touched the soft, wet warmth between her legs. It was another wind-up. She went off to have breakfast with her family. He went off uptown to do his shopping. On his way back from shopping, he called for Jane again and got fucked about or fucked off. Maybe she would make time for him later. It was her husband's last day, and couldn't Manus be reasonable? Manus could not be reasonable. The sun was shining. The early January air was not overly cold, and as Manus walked up a pleasant track, lined with trees and hedges, he felt shit. How the hell had he ever managed to get himself involved with Jane? How come he cared? She was just fucking him about. He was just stupid to let her. Nick caught up with Manus halfway up the track. Can you help us out? She wants more and I'm knackered. Now, more likely the real truth of this was that Nick had had his fill and wanted Manus, whom he knew would have draw and money, to call. Manus didn't care for the truth, and Nick could hardly keep up with Manus as he rushed back to the B&B. Manus had never had sloppy seconds before, and wondered what kind of a girl liked it. He didn't wonder that much, he just rushed, in fear that someone else would come upon her first. A young nubile left all alone in Nick's bedroom, in the dirty, god-forsaken bed and breakfast house. Take no time at all before some lecherous old coyote would sniff her out. Sure enough, when they got there was Mr. Shields. The girl was still glowing sweet when she smiled shyly again at Manus. Manus asked her for a hug. The girl stood up and gave Manus a hug. Manus asked Shields to give them a bit of space, and as soon as he left the room, Manus had her pants off and his prick out in seconds. His arm was still in plaster and it was awkward. They kissed. Her mouth was small and tight. He couldn't relate to the face he was kissing. On the bed, she kept her feet flat on the mattress, raised her knees and groin up. There was something wrong. Her little tits like unripe pears. He lost his heart on and had to rub his little dick against her little slit. It was only once he got it in that he stopped to look at her and ask her name. Madeline. Eventually his little dick spurted its load and dribbled back out. He asked her age. 16. At least she was legal. He thought about age and what was right and wrong. He decided he had better make the most of what might cost him so dearly. He began to stroke his dick back up inside her. He worked it up a fair bit and tried talking a little. Are you all right? He asked. She said she was, and then, you're good. But Manus didn't feel 100%. Still, he pumped away for a bit and came again with not much to it for him or her. He could have stayed, but decided against. He got dressed, picked up his shopping, kissed her once more and left. She looked sad when he left. Outside on the main road, the traffic rolled past. The sun shone and the wind blew. Manus shook his head at his actions. At the clinical way, he had managed to detach himself. He could, just like that, fuck a little girl and walk straight away. It was the most shameful deed he had ever done. He still had his shopping in one arm and his other arm in plaster of Paris, and his shameful, sleeked, sly grin broke across his face. Later that day, Jane would finish with Manus so she could go out in the town with her husband. Manus got drunk and took every kind of drug he could lay his hands on. He went to the nightclub where Jane and her hubby were. Jane ignored him, and he raised his stupid big plaster of Paris arm as though he were going to hit some friend of her husband's. Jane jumped on his back, and the three of them went down. Jane and her husband's friend got back up, but other people kept Manus down. Manus was punched and kicked. He used his plaster arm to protect himself as much as he could and lay on the floor laughing as they tried to hurt him. Then he got thrown out of the club, and Jane stayed on with her husband. In the morning, his face looked stupid, but Manus didn't mind that much. At least it was clear cut, Jane's choice. And Manus hoped that the kicking might atone in some way for his shameful deed.